Mark thought he had it all: a loving wife, 2 wonderful kids, and a life built on trust. But when a chance discovery exposes Claire's infidelity, his world shatters. Determined to seek justice and reclaim control, Mark embarks on a calculated path of revenge. However, as he confronts betrayal head-on, his actions set off a chain of events that spiral beyond his control. In a story where trust is broken, secrets unravel, and choices carry devastating consequences, Mark learns that some endings are far more tragic than betrayal itself. The Weekend That Changed Everything is a gripping tale of love, loss, and the unexpected cost of revenge. I've always considered myself a laid-back guy. At 38, I'd built a life most people would envy. A wife, Claire, who was the epitome of grace and charm. 2 wonderful kids, Sophie, 10, and Ethan, 8, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. A comfortable home with a backyard pool and a stable career in IT that allowed me the flexibility to balance work and family. From the outside, we were the perfect suburban family. And for a long time, I believed that lie myself. Looking back, the first signs were there if I'd been paying closer attention. Claire's job as a marketing manager often required her to travel for conferences and client meetings. I never questioned it. After all, she was ambitious and talented, traits that had drawn me to her in the first place. But in the last few months, the trips had become more frequent. I'd brush it off, rationalizing that her company was growing and she was being recognized for her hard work. At least, that's what I told myself. What else could explain the late nights, the sudden calls she had to take in private, and the careful way she began guarding her phone like it held state secrets? The turning point came on our way to a family vacation in the mountains. We were driving through the rural stretches of North Carolina when Claire said she needed to stop at a Wawa. Sophie and Ethan were dozing in the back seat, so I pulled over without a second thought. Claire grabbed her purse and headed inside, leaving her phone on the passenger seat. I didn't mean to snoop. I was on my phone when hers lit up, the screen showing a notification. My curiosity got the better of me, but before I could even read it, Claire burst out of the store. She wasn't walking, she was sprinting. Her urgency startled me, and before I realized it, I had her phone in my hand. Claire yanked open the car door, her face pale. "Give me that," she snapped, snatching the phone from me with a force that left no room for argument. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "Just a work thing," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Some surveys I've been doing for a client." "Surveys?" Her explanation was so absurd that it stopped me from pressing further. I filed the moment away, pretending to accept her words, even though my gut told me otherwise. The rest of the vacation passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. Claire seemed more distant than usual, glued to her phone whenever she thought I wasn't looking. At night, after the kids had gone to bed, she'd sit out on the cabin's deck, whispering into her phone. I told myself it was work, but the doubt had already taken root. Back home, life settled back into its familiar rhythms, but the unease lingered. It was as if a crack had formed in the foundation of my trust, and no matter how much I tried to patch it up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when I found the receipt. It was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out the garage, trying to make space for the kids' bikes. Claire was out running errands, and the kids were at a friend's house. As I sorted through old boxes, I came across a manila envelope tucked inside a stack of papers. Curious, I opened it and found a receipt from a jewelry store dated 6 weeks ago. The purchase? A necklace worth over $3,000. I stared at it, my mind racing. Claire had never mentioned buying jewelry, and there certainly hadn't been any new additions to her collection. The date on the receipt matched one of her business trips. I could feel the blood drain from my face as realization dawned. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there. My wife was hiding something. That evening, I confronted her. "Claire, can we talk?" I said as she sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. "Sure," she said, barely looking up. I set the receipt down in front of her. "What's this?" Her eyes widened for a split second before she composed herself. "Oh, that," she said, feigning nonchalance. "It was a gift for a coworker. His anniversary." "A coworker?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Yes," she said, her tone defensive. "He's been a great mentor to me, and I wanted to thank him." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the words felt rehearsed, her delivery too smooth. The doubt in my mind was no longer just a whisper, it was a scream. From that moment on, I became a detective in my own marriage. Late at night, while Claire slept, I combed through her emails, her social media, her text messages. At first, I found nothing. She was careful, meticulous in covering her tracks. But I didn't give up. And then, one night, I hit the jackpot. I was going through her phone when I stumbled upon a hidden folder in her photo gallery. Inside were pictures of her with a man I didn't recognize. They weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. The way they looked at each other, the way she smiled in his presence, it was a smile I hadn't seen in years. His name was Nick, a name that appeared frequently in her work emails. A quick search through her messages revealed the truth: Nick wasn't just a coworker. He was the man she was seeing on those business trips. My world crumbled. The woman I had built my life with, the mother of my children, was having an affair. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. But beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir: anger. Claire thought she could deceive me, but she underestimated me. She believed I would sit idly by, oblivious to her lies. She was wrong. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her regret every moment she had betrayed me. The game had just begun. I didn't confront Claire right away. The temptation to rage, to scream at her for destroying our marriage, was almost unbearable. But I knew better. Acting impulsively would only give her the upper hand. Instead, I decided to take my time and plan my next steps carefully. The following days were a blur of routine and quiet resentment. I went through the motions, helping Sophie and Ethan with their homework, mowing the lawn, making small talk with Claire as if nothing had changed. She seemed oblivious to my newfound knowledge, which gave me all the time I needed to prepare. Each night, after the kids were asleep and Claire was lost in whatever lies she was telling herself to justify her actions, I worked in secret. I started by gathering evidence. The photos, the emails, the texts, I compiled it all into a folder on my laptop, backing it up onto a secure drive just in case. I didn't know exactly how I would use it yet, but I knew I'd need it. I also began paying closer attention to her behavior. Every time she claimed to have a late meeting or an upcoming trip, I logged the details. I checked her phone whenever I had the chance, noting down anything suspicious. It was like piecing together a puzzle, and with each new detail, the image of her betrayal became clearer. About a week after I discovered the affair, I found an opportunity to dig deeper. Claire announced that she'd be traveling to Atlanta for a weekend conference. "It's an important one," she said over dinner. "I really need to make a good impression." I nodded, pretending to be supportive. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything while you're gone." In reality, I was already making plans. I waited until she left for the airport early Friday morning, then dropped the kids off with my parents for the weekend. Once I was alone, I dove into action. The first thing I did was log into her email account. I'd managed to guess her password after a few tries, our anniversary, ironically enough, and found exactly what I was looking for. There were messages between Claire and Nick, arranging their rendezvous. They'd planned to meet at a boutique hotel in Atlanta, just a short drive from the conference venue. My stomach churned as I read their exchanges. The flirtatious tone, the inside jokes, the explicit plans, it was all there in black and white. But as much as it hurt, it also solidified my resolve. I decided to pay them a visit. The drive to Atlanta was long and tense. My mind raced with possibilities, from catching them in the act to confronting them in the hotel lobby. I wasn't sure exactly what I'd do when I got there, but I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. When I arrived at the hotel, I parked across the street and waited. It didn't take long for me to spot them. They walked out together, laughing, completely at ease. Claire looked radiant, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my anger. I followed them discreetly as they strolled down the street, eventually stopping at a small cafe. They sat at an outdoor table, completely absorbed in each other. Watching them, I felt a mix of emotions: pain, betrayal, rage. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to confront them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. They were undeniable: Claire and Nick, holding hands, sharing a quiet moment together. I knew these images would be useful later, but for now, they were enough to confirm what I already knew. I stayed in Atlanta for the rest of the weekend, observing from a distance. I watched them check into the hotel, saw them leave for dinner, and even caught a glimpse of them returning to their room late at night. It was excruciating, but it also gave me clarity. By Sunday evening, I was back home, preparing for the next phase of my plan. I'd gathered all the evidence I needed: emails, photos, timestamps. Now it was time to make my move. I started by consulting a lawyer. I wanted to ensure I had everything in order before confronting Claire. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Amanda, was blunt but efficient. She reviewed my evidence and assured me that I had a strong case. "If you want to proceed with divorce, we can file immediately," she said. "But if you're looking for leverage, this is more than enough to negotiate on your terms." Leverage. The word stuck with me. This wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about ensuring that Claire faced the consequences of her actions. The following week, I began setting the stage for the confrontation. I arranged for the kids to stay with my parents again, giving me the space to handle things without interruptions. I also contacted Nick's wife, Karen. It wasn't hard to find her. A quick search on social media led me to her profile, and from there, I sent a polite but direct message. "Hi Karen, I believe we have something important to discuss. Please let me know if you're available to talk." To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. "What's this about?" I kept it brief, suggesting we meet in person to discuss the situation. She agreed, and 2 days later, we sat across from each other at a local coffee shop. Karen was a petite woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. As I laid out the evidence, her expression shifted from confusion to anger. "I knew something was off," she said, her voice shaking. "He's been distant lately, always making excuses to stay late at work. I just didn't want to believe it." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "So, what's your plan?" I explained my intention to confront Claire and Nick, ensuring they couldn't deny their actions. Karen agreed to help, offering to join me when the time came. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange sense of calm. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Claire and Nick thought they'd gotten away with their lies, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the next few days preparing for the showdown. Karen and I stayed in touch, refining the details of our plan. The goal was simple: confront them in a way that left no room for denial. The evidence was airtight, but this wasn't just about proving their betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring they understood the magnitude of what they'd done. Friday arrived quicker than I expected. Claire was home that morning, packing for yet another business trip. She moved around the bedroom briskly, humming to herself as she folded clothes into her suitcase. "Another big meeting?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," she replied without looking up. It's a client I've been working on for months. This could be a huge win for the company. Her lie stung, but I forced a smile. Good luck. Let me know if you need anything. Thanks, she said, flashing me a quick smile. As she left the house, suitcase in hand, I watched her go with a mix of anger and sadness. This was it, the last time she would walk out on me under the guise of work. I waited until she was gone before calling Karen. She's on her way, I said. Good, Karen replied. Nick just left too. I'll meet you at the hotel. We'd agreed to confront them at the boutique hotel where they'd planned their rendezvous. Karen had called ahead to confirm their reservation, pretending to be Nick's assistant. It was almost too easy. When I arrived at the hotel, Karen was already there, pacing in the lobby. She looked as determined as I felt, though I could see the pain in her eyes. You ready? I asked. She nodded. Let's do this. We approached the front desk, where a young woman greeted us with a bright smile. Can I help you? Yes, Karen said smoothly. We're here to see Nick and Claire. Could you let them know we've arrived? The receptionist hesitated, glancing at her screen. I'm sorry, but I can't give out guest information. Karen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I understand. But this is an urgent family matter. Please, just let them know we're here. It'll save everyone a lot of trouble. The woman hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. I'll call their room. Karen and I waited in tense silence as the receptionist dialed. A few seconds later, she looked up. They're on their way down. My heart pounded as we stepped back, positioning ourselves near the lobby entrance. The elevator doors opened moments later, and there they were. Claire looked radiant, her hair styled and her face glowing with anticipation. Nick stood beside her, tall and confident, with a smug grin that made my blood boil. The moment they saw us, their expressions changed. Claire's smile froze, and Nick's confident demeanor faltered. What's going on? Claire asked, her voice shaking. Karen stepped forward, her eyes blazing. What's going on is that we know everything. The emails, the hotel stays, the lies, it's all out in the open now. Nick started to speak, but Karen cut him off. Don't even try to deny it, Nick. I have the evidence. You've been cheating on me with her for months. Claire turned to me, her face pale. Mark, I can explain. Don't, I said sharply. I've heard enough lies from you. This isn't the time for excuses. The lobby was eerily quiet as other guests and staff watched the scene unfold. Claire's gaze darted around, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. Karen pulled out her phone, holding it up for Nick to see. I've got every text, every email, every photo. You thought you could get away with this? You're pathetic. Nick's face turned red, and he looked at Claire, as if expecting her to defend him. But Claire was frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. I took a step closer to her, my voice low but firm. I trusted you, Claire. I gave you everything, our home, our family, our life together. And this is how you repay me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. Save it, I said. You made your choices, and now you'll deal with the consequences. Karen turned to the receptionist, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. I hope you'll forgive us for the drama, but we're done here. Without another word, Karen and I walked out of the hotel together, leaving Claire and Nick behind. Outside, the cool evening air hit me like a wave. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. Karen stood beside me, her hands clenched into fists. You okay? I asked. She nodded, though her eyes were glassy. I will be. What about you? I'll survive, I said. We parted ways after that, each returning to the messes that our spouses had left behind. I drove home in silence, my mind racing with thoughts of what came next. When I got back, the house was quiet. I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the mantel. Sophie and Ethan's smiling faces stared back at me, a painful reminder of what was at stake. The confrontation was over, but the battle was just beginning. Claire didn't know it yet, but I had already filed for divorce. With the evidence I'd gathered, there was no doubt that I'd come out on top. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The storm wasn't over, but I was ready to face it. Claire had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The confrontation at the hotel marked the beginning of the end, but the days that followed were no less tumultuous. Claire didn't return home immediately after that night. She texted me a few times, pleased to talk, to explain, to salvage what was left of our marriage. I ignored her. What could she say that would erase what she'd done? I moved forward, meeting with my lawyer to finalize the divorce paperwork. The house, the kids, the financials, it was all a tangled mess that I would unravel one thread at a time. My focus was on protecting Sophie and Ethan, shielding them from the fallout of their mother's betrayal. They didn't need to know the details. Not yet. Claire finally came back 3 days later. Her arrival was quiet, almost tentative, as if she wasn't sure if she still belonged here. She stood in the doorway, her suitcase in hand, her eyes puffy and red. "I came to get my things," she said softly. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We didn't exchange words as she walked past me, heading upstairs. The silence was heavy, each second stretching into an eternity. While she packed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. A part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, buried deep beneath the anger and betrayal, felt an ache. We had shared a life together once. That life was gone now, but the pain lingered. When she came back downstairs, she hesitated at the bottom step, her suitcase behind her. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman I'd once loved. But all I saw was a stranger. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said coldly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I didn't mean for it to end this way." She left without another word, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the house. I thought that would be the last time I saw her for a while, but I was wrong. The next few weeks passed in a haze of legal meetings and awkward exchanges with the kids. Sophie and Ethan knew something was wrong, but I hadn't told them the full truth yet. Claire called occasionally, but I rarely picked up. When I did, it was only to discuss logistics, drop-offs, schedules, nothing more. Then one night, everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was helping Ethan with his math homework while Sophie played a video game in the living room. The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was Claire. "What now?" I muttered, answering the call. But the voice on the other end wasn't Claire's. "Mr. Johnson," a woman said. "This is Officer Riley with the Charlotte Police Department." My stomach dropped. "Yes. I'm sorry to inform you, but your wife, Claire Johnson, was involved in a car accident earlier this evening. She didn't survive." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What happened?" I managed to ask. "There was a collision on the interstate," the officer explained. "It appears she lost control of her vehicle. We're still investigating the cause, but there's no indication of foul play." The conversation blurred after that. I hung up at some point, but I didn't remember doing it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. Claire was gone. The days that followed were a whirlwind of grief, confusion, and guilt. I hadn't loved Claire in a long time, not the way I once had, but her death left a void I hadn't expected. She was the mother of my children, a woman I had shared my life with for over a decade. And now she was gone. Sophie and Ethan took the news hard. Sophie cried for hours, clinging to me as if I might disappear too. Ethan was quieter, his grief manifesting in sudden outbursts of anger and tears. I did my best to comfort them, but I felt like I was drowning in my own emotions. As I went through Claire's belongings, preparing for the funeral, I found a small notebook tucked away in her nightstand. Curious, I opened it and began to read. It was a journal, filled with entries that spanned the last few months of her life. She had written about her affair, her guilt, her struggle to reconcile her feelings for Nick with her love for our family. One entry stood out. I don't know how to fix this. I've hurt Mark, hurt the kids, hurt myself. Nick isn't what I thought he was. He doesn't love me the way I thought he did. I've ruined everything, and I don't know how to go back. I just want my family back. I want to be the woman Mark fell in love with again. But I don't think he'll ever forgive me. The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Claire had been lost, confused, desperate to find a way out of the mess she'd created. And now it was too late. The funeral was a small, somber affair. As I stood by her casket, watching the tears stream down Sophie and Ethan's faces, I felt a weight settle over me. Claire had made mistakes, terrible ones, but she had also been a mother, a wife, a person who had tried, in her own flawed way, to find happiness. In the end, her life was a tragic reminder of how easily things can fall apart. And as I walked away from the gravesite, holding my children's hands, I vowed to do better, for them, and for myself. But the ache of her loss lingered, a painful shadow over the life we had once shared.